Today, I get to introduce you to my longtime amazing friend, Jane. And Jane is not just one of the most loyal and supportive friends I've ever had in my life, but she's also one of the original God powered young warriors. But as I introduce Jane today, I want you to really recognize how much value we can glean from Jane. We all face challenges. And some of those challenges are so dramatic, so significant. They're the ones that leave you questioning why, the ones that literally shake you to your core. And Jane has faced challenges that most of us can't even wrap our minds around. And in the process, when you're also trying to discern God's will, trying to discern direction, trying to figure out just what's going on, then there's the distraction of well-meaning advice that very rarely connects. But and as an introduction, which is a bad one, Jane, because I've been through that. Tell us a little bit about your story, but let's get to the idea of, which I think is so important, is I think so often that well-meaning advice really causes you to struggle to question if you've missed it. But tell us just a little bit about the challenge that you faced. I don't want to take away by doing it myself.
Well, I think, gosh, I'm not even sure where to start. I think one of my biggest so my story is, as you know, Randy, which, by the way, I want to thank you because even before you started your difficult journey, you were always encouraging and supportive to me.
Thank you.
You were willing to stand by my side. You listened. You never tried to give it away. You just encouraged me in every way, and Keelan, Mike, and Sean, which I really needed at that time. So thank you. I
Oh,
I really really needed it at that time. Um, and I that really is huge because you never criticized. You only encouraged and pointed in the direction that you felt was best for us to go. So my story is in that in 1999, my husband was electrocuted trying to save a little boy who was being electrocuted. They were electrocuted in water, and that's where the first miracle started, in that they all survived. They all survived. The young boy is married now. He's a dad.
praise God.
Mike, on the other hand, ended up with a traumatic brain injury, which left him in a minimally conscious or permanent vegetative state for 16 years. Um, And so, therefore, I needed to make life and death decisions. I needed to sit down. I was fortunate in that Mike had retired 2 years prior to this accident. So I knew what all of our affairs were. I knew, we planned for retirement. I knew where everything. So all that stuff I knew. But the hard part was um, the groups of people. So I knew my kids. I knew the decisions. Even though they were kids, they were very, 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 very strong and very medical on their father's condition and where they stood. But then I also had my in-laws,
Yeah.
and they viewed it very differently. And they are a family that's very tight. And my experience of them is normally in a case like my situation, uh, the person who's in the situation, the family gets together and gets told what to do.
Yeah.
And I didn't do that. I knew every decision I made, I was going to spend the rest of my life living with it. I knew, um, again, I would be answering to my 3 children to the day they
Yeah,
sent me off to glory.
and let me interject. So just so for our audience, to take a moment and reflect upon that for 16 years your husband is in a pervasive vegetative state. You have young children, and you continually have to make life decisions. And at that, for 16 years, you're struggling through the question, God, are you going to heal him? Are you taking him to heaven? Do I need to pray harder? Is there some alternative therapy? I mean, the fog that you had to navigate through, and again, with small children, and as you said, recognizing the decisions you make, you have to live with for the rest of your life. And lots of people, including family, who were convinced they knew what was right for you, what was right for you to do. And you've got to navigate this. And your life is, to a significant degree, absolutely put on hold. You can't envision the future at that point. You're just trying to survive the day and trying to make the right decisions.
Well, you've hit on some very good points. So my difficult part was my heart hurt for my in-laws. I totally understood how they felt, contrary to what they believe. I did, and I did everything I could to make it as easy and possible for them. But then there's the other part of it, that the Lord filled me with such an incredible gift of faith that honestly, walking through taking care of Mike, that part, in some ways was easy, especially now that I can sit back and look on it. God provided everything along the way. It's not like I could do anything about it.
I, and,
It
and,
was,
and
and
I'm
he
not,
not
I
only,
want to point out to our audience, I'm not laughing at, I'm laughing because when you go through it, and Jane, you would agree, until you've gone through it, you can't grasp that recognition of looking back and saying, at the lowest point, God took care of the details that just were beyond our ability. That just like he
totally.
took the children of Israel through the wilderness, and it says they lacked nothing. It wasn't where they wanted to be, but he did meet them in a place and took care of them in a way that we just can't comprehend until you've been through it, right, Jane?
That's totally true. Until you've been there. I think, and I've shared that with you. I think I shared with you where I felt like I was snatched from the regular world and transplanted into the world of the disabled. And what I discovered in the world of the disabled is this incredibly beautiful world, a whole nother way of being. There's so many more people out there living the life that I lived in more ways, and you would never know it if you were to look at them on the outside. I
Yeah.
discovered people that were more positive, more encouraging, no judgment, no judgment, and who knew what the value of life, what was really, really important in life. Conversations like I could never have with anybody out there. It's like I walked this fence at times when I was with my friends and everything, and they didn't understand. They even questioned me at one point, "Why are you doing this?" And I'm
Yeah.
like, "Why am I doing what?" You know, and and it's because that was the world. I mean, every step of the way, like even in the hospital, um, about a week after. So Mike's accident happened on Fourth of July weekend. And so a lot of doctors and things were off. And then the following Monday, I happened to get to the hospital by myself, and this doctor comes in, and turns out she was friends. And you know what? She looked as close to an angel as I could possibly have ever seen an angel. And she said, "I hear you've had a difficult time." And then she was so encouraging. She sat down and said to me how, I was a young doctor and this gentleman was in a helicopter or plane crash. She goes, I'm like, there's no way he's coming out of this. I'm wasting my skills. I'm wasting this. She said she came in from a weekend and there he was sitting at the desk asking for steak. And she goes, you never know what God can do. You never know what God will do. And I remember another time, and I needed that. I needed that from the medical personnel because everybody else was trying to tell me something else.
Yeah.
And I just knew in my heart, right at that, I need to give it 3 days. Just what's going to happen is going to happen. Just walk this out. I mean, um, and then the 3 days came, and I remember praying in the chapel and crying my eyes out. And this person came over to me, and some type of medical, had a stethoscope around it. I don't know if she was a doctor, nurse, or therapist or whatever, but she said to me, goes, I hear you crying over here. She goes, and I just want you to know that there's some things that God can do that we doctors and nurses, so I guess she was a doctor, that we doctors and medical personnel can't do. She goes, don't give up. And things like that would constantly come in my path. I remember driving up a hill one day and I was really discouraged. I was drained. Mike had been sick, and and the kids weren't doing their homework, and I was getting phone calls from school, those things. And there was a license plate, and the license plate was, "It's a miracle." or expect a miracle. And I'm like, thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And only to find out that apparently in and around the area, there was an auto place that was called Miracles or something. And I was like, thank you. Okay, Lord, thank you. I need, just little things like that that would come in. The biggest thing for me, one of the biggest things that was a turning point for me, um, to stand straighter and walk stronger and steady was, it was my son Michael's birthday. And we had gone down to New York City for the Yankees parade. They had won the World Series. And when we came home, I was so depressed. All I wanted to do, and I said that night, I'm like, guys, you're going to have to put yourselves to bed. I can't. I went to bed and I was about to start really bawling my eyes out. When my daughter comes in, she goes, Mom, 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 there was a present at the door. There was a present at the door. And I'm like, okay, so let me backtrack. Prior to coming home, we did stop to see Mike at the hospital. And we took him outside and realized I needed to get him a blanket. One of the things that, I needed to throw to, keep him warm when we took him outside. So as Keelan sat down and handed this to me, I opened up this card and it was from my dear, dear friend who has struggled for years with cancer. And she said to me, there's so much I wish I could do for you, but all I can do is pray and crochet. And out of this came this beautiful, exactly what I needed throw from Michael. It couldn't have been put together any better. And I sat there and I cried because I was like, Lord, you had this in the making for me way before I even knew I needed this. You provided it, it in such a way that I knew that God saw me, was taking care of it, was providing before I needed. I wrapped myself in that blanket that night and I slept with it, praising God and feeling his love wrapped around me. And it was such a pivotal moment for me in my walk with Mike, my walk with the Lord, um, because it was so needed. It just told me, I'm taking care of you. This is all right. I'm taking care of it before you even know you need something.
And if I can interject there, the challenge is none of us can really understand and empathize truly with what someone else is going through. We just can't. But there is a tendency, and so this is a challenge for all of us, that doing what you can do can have such an impact. And on the other hand, the people who are well-meaning and trying to help you out, I know when we went through, which you walked with us through our time of trial, but I know in your situation, well-meaning friends, and I'll just put it out there were people who said, who basically challenged you that if you had more faith, he'd be healed. On the other hand, there were those who were challenging you that, why don't you pull the plug and move on? I mean, you had so many conflicting voices. And the alternative is this friend who just says, I wish I could do more, but all I could do is pray and crochet. And I remember a couple of things on our journey, because you are in the middle of it, you're going, especially I think for me, I don't know if maybe I'm the oddball out there, but I need to see a vision of the future. That's just how I'm built. And when you're in the middle of it, you can't. You can't even see how you're going to survive it. And I remember this would have been 5 or 6 years ago, Jane. You said this to me right at a really low point, and you said, God knows you can handle it. Now, until you've been through it, and until you kind of got to the victory side of it, that may sound cliche. But when you said that, the reality of it really sank in is that God doesn't let anything come in that you can't. It may be crushing, but he doesn't let anything come in that you can't handle. And, it's funny, I've never forgotten when you said that. And at some low points, it's one of those things that kind of helps you kind of keep the eyes on the Lord, that he is going to get you through it. Because there are times, at least for me, and I don't know if you felt that way, it just felt never ending. And the idea, the vision of what comes out of this, how can And people, again, with all their well-meaning advice and, oh, it's going to be a testimony. Testimony, I just want to live. So, but it is amazing how, on the other hand, there are those people in your life. And so that would be my encouragement to all of us. When somebody's going through it, whether in your mind it's a small thing, whether it's overwhelming, this tendency to think we have an answer. And unless the Holy Spirit is telling you to say something, focus instead on what builds them up, what strengthens them, what encourages them just for a little bit longer.
Yes. I could only have said that to you because I walked through it. And I do
Yeah,
remember, gosh, you pointed out so many things. So, but let me go back to I had a handful, a very solid handful of incredible, who I call Rebecca and Abigail's, that held my arms up when I couldn't, you know. They walked by my side. I think we all wondered why God allowed this. It doesn't really matter why God allowed it.
sure.
Um, what I came to realize, it's not the outcome, it's the journey that's more important, you know. Um,
Yeah.
and I do remember one time when somebody turned around and said to me, God's not going to give you more than you can handle. And I'm like, thank you. And when I closed the door and said goodbye, I remember going, when I get to heaven, God, you and I are going to duke this out. And at the same time, you and I are going to do this. You think I can handle this? And yet, I remember when my dad was sick, and I was praying and I was asking the Lord, like, what do I do? And I remember the Lord saying to me, I want you to make your father's days the best days. And I remember thinking, you want me to help him die? Do you know who you're talking to, God? I'm the one who brought home a one-eyed blind beagle and made him a guard dog. You want me to help my father die? Like, what? So, one of the things
Yeah.
I love about the Lord and that I learned through this journey was God's shoulders are more than big enough to handle our hurts and our disappointments. As a matter of fact, He encourages us to lean on Him for that and to bring that to Him. And I believe today the Lord giggles and laughs over some of my outbursts prior to it. Um, those are some of the things that I do. But um, and I forgot what you were asking me part of the question on because I got sidetracked.
Now that I'm sidetracked too, and that's okay. But, part of it is what I love about you, Jane, is not only are you genuine, but you have this vivaciousness that you have gone through the trial that most of us can't even imagine. Uh, by the way, after 16 years, her husband, Michael, did pass. And she's had to, since then, kind of rebuild a life. And out of that is God is amazing, God is faithful, but that doesn't mean there wasn't
Oh, totally.
debris that still had to be cleaned up from the past. And so you've also been on this journey where you've seen how God's carried you through it, but now then you've also been on this journey for a bit now of really discerning where God is taking you next. And one of the things that I've seen is the process of you navigating how to let go of pieces of the past that no longer served you. And that's harder than it sounds. I remember when you put your house up for sale, that how long that you knew it was the right thing to do, but there was a process before you were truly ready to do it. And there's, I'll say it this way, there are excuses because, you lived in that house for many, many years. There's stuff that has to be packed up. There's things that need to be done before it can be sold. But the reality is, to a degree, those were distractions. It was coming to that final decision to let go of that aspect of the past. And there's been so many more along the way, and how God has walked you through that. And as you have been faithful to let go of those things, God has increasingly taken you to a new place in Him, a new place of healing. And then ultimately, what I do want to get to in a minute is one of the challenges when people who love God go through stuff, there is this sense, very real sense from the Lord, He wants to use you. And it's very easy to get caught in this trap of thinking your calling is now to help people who are going through a similar style burden. And one of the things that I love about you, Jane, is I think there was a little bit of a season there, but you are increasingly recognizing what God's calling you to is empower people to the victory that comes after the trial. That it's not surviving the trial, that it's moving into the victory that comes after the trial. What would you say to that?
Well, there's a lot to say about that. Um, the best way that I can say to walk through a season like you and I have been walking through is you literally have to do it one day at a time, one step at a time. And I think I shared this with you, Randy, that if I didn't live in the moment and I looked to the future, I would lose my peace. And that's where my faith and my trust in God was
Yeah,
imperative, and that I needed to stand on that, and that I had to trust that. Well, I think the one thing I learned from Mike after he had the accident, when the accident happened, is that um, we never know if we're going to have our next breath. You know, um, it happened so sudden. He had retired. We were planning on moving to North Carolina. There was nothing but positive and futures and all these goals ahead of us. And in 1 second, it was all taken away and wiped away. And in 1 second, our life was totally changed, absolutely totally changed. Whether Mike woke up right away or not, our life was changed forever. We were going to view life through different eyes and through different experiences. And I could either let that be a building block in my life or let it be a stumbling block in my life. And I was determined that I was going to make it a stepping stone in my life. Um, and but again, it was a long period of time, and especially as the kids were getting older and they were moving on to college and I was home alone, and I was like, "What? This is going to be my life? Really, God? This is what you have planned? Really, God?" But I also know along
yeah,
that way, especially since I had 3 young children at the time, that, they deserved a life. This unfortunately happened to Mike. And therefore, I was gonna
yeah,
do what I could to make their lives the best life. I asked for them. God blessed me with them. They were a gift for them. They deserve to have a good life too. And I think one of the things recently, in talking to the kids, I asked them, like, what did you really learn from all of that? And my son and my daughter both said to me that you taught us that we could still laugh and still have fun even when life was hard and when it was really really difficult. You showed us that to still live life. We only have one life. There's no do-overs, there's no going back, there's only going forward. And like
yeah.
you, I am a goal oriented person, but the only way I was going to make it through that time was to do what was important, what he put before me that day, to do it the best that I could, um, to seek him in everything. And then,
And one of the things that you did, though, also interrupting, you kept focus on the priorities. That even when it was emotionally hard, like again, doing stuff for the kids, making sure they had a fulfilling life, and that sounds easy, except when you're in that, you know, because there were, and I know, and we've experienced a bit of that. Some days are just soul crushing, and it's so hard to just get up and move forward. And sometimes you have to do it just for the kids. And that's one of the things that I saw in you, Jane, through this whole journey is, as hard as it was, just your continued faithfulness. That doesn't mean you didn't have bad days, but that you worked so hard to keep the priorities right. You worked so hard, even in this sounds easy again, you worked so hard to make the right decisions, which again sounds easy, but in the pain and in the confusion, sometimes the right decisions are a little fuzzy. But you kept that priority through the whole thing, and you kept that priority when it would be so easy to give up on God, to just let the disappointment overwhelm you. You did stay faithful. You stayed focused on God. Doesn't mean you didn't have a bad day. Like you said, God's got big shoulders. He can handle it when, I'm not saying you did, but He can handle my tantrums. He can handle my crying like, God, I can't handle it anymore. As long as you stay focused on Him.
Yes.
Wouldn't you agree?
Totally. The only thing I can say to you is, as hard as it was, there was no such thing as not focusing in on God. For me, anyway.
Yeah.
I understand many people would walk away, and maybe there were times that I might have, like, eaten an extra bag of Oreos that I shouldn't have eaten, just to stuff it, to be honest with you, and I knew I shouldn't do it, and I wasn't being obedient at that point, but it was what got me through. There was n For me, there was no not knowing that God had this, even though I didn't like it. There was no there
Yeah.
was no and don't misunderstand me, because we all do at times. We put it in God's hands and we end up taking it back. But move
Yeah.
that stuff out of the way and come to, is it me or God? No, it's for me, it was God. There was no denying.
Yeah.
Um and in my situation, there is nothing very plain black and white in scripture, you know. Um it was just what
Yeah.
I knew, and making a lot of the decisions, I'd always ask God first. Where is it in my heart? How's it checking in my heart? But then the other was, can I look my children in the eyes? Can I will spend, can
Yeah.
I, first of all, can I get out of bed and look myself in the mirror? And then can I look, and even with
Yeah.
every really hard decision I made, I remember thinking, if my kids were here right now, even if it was a wrong decision, from my heart, was it the best decision that I could make? Could I say to them, even if I say, I'm sorry, it was a wrong decision, I genuinely thought, could I say that? Those were some of my deciding factors. Those were the things that I realized as time went on were motivating to me. Because at the time, many times, especially in the beginning of the accident, you're just making decisions and you're taking it back. And I wouldn't allow people to push me into making a decision, which frustrated them. And especially if you knew me before, I was like this happy-go-lucky person. I mean, my biggest thing, Mike and I were in ministry together, and Mike would put the Bible studies and everything else together. I was the one that came up with the crazy games, like tug of war into a pile of shaving cream, that type of thing. That was, I remember one game that
Yeah.
Mike is, okay, why do I tell them? I'm like this, and he looks at me and goes, you want me to tell them to do what? I mean, that's how insane the game was, right? But that's one of the things with my reputation, which is why the churches in the area used to love me doing vacation Bible school, and I was in charge of the games, because they knew I'd come up with these insane games, and everybody would have fun, and that was our reputation, that we had the best parties, we had the best youth group parties. And prior to Mike's accident, the parents weren't leaving the parties; they wanted to stay. um, so people, I think, were very surprised that I could handle this and make these decisions and make these hard decisions and live with these decisions and walk these decisions out. I think that surprised. And that was another thing. It took me a while until I realized that we were living in a fishbowl. We were being watched, and I do
Yeah.
think that people kept thinking, if I would just disconnect the feeding tube and let him go, our life would go back to normal. But our lives were never going to go back to normal. And contrary to what a lot of people may
Yeah.
think, every decision I make or I made affected other people. It affected Mike, it affected my children, it affected my in-laws, it affected, and I was surprised to find how upset. There was this one gentleman in the nursing home that Mike was in, and the wife did get a court order. He had been in a coma for over 5 years, and she got a court order to have permission to have the feeding tube disconnected. And the staff was very upset. They were very upset. They were very upset that they were letting this stay. So yes, I understand that we have those rights, we have those legal things to do, but it does affect other people.
Well, I am going to interject though, because you're being very gracious. Because the reality is, There were people, which we won't name, frequently in your life who had very strong opinions and beliefs on what the right thing to do was. And many times we're not shy about sharing that. And there were times you had to stand strong in that just wasn't the course you were going to take. Now, the good news is, and what I do want to share to people who are going through various challenges, you don't try to take justice in your own hands. But one of the things that I know that you've shared with me in the last year or two, though, Gene, is how some of those people who kind of, for lack of a better way to say it, judged the decisions you were making, that were convinced they knew better, have now come around without any effort on your part, and kind of they're starting to see a greater depth to the situation. And they have a newfound respect for both the decisions you did make, but also how you handled it. And you don't see that. And so one of the things I want people to really grasp is when you're in the middle of it, you don't necessarily see that. When those people who do have those strong opinions on what you should do, how you should handle it, you don't see, and not that all of them will come around later and recognize kind of a greater understanding of what you were going through in the decision-making process, et cetera. But I will say that's one thing that you have experienced in the last year or two is more and more people who are starting to really appreciate at a greater degree what you were dealing with.
Yes. And that's part of, as I think I also shared with you, wasn't it in the last couple of years that I realized that I was called to be a pioneer, a trailblazer? So for the most
Yeah,
part, I was rather young compared to other people. And so I did walk this walk first compared to others. And at the same time, remember I shared with you, God gave me an abundance of grace, an amazing, strong faith that it could not, I couldn't shake it if I wanted to. You know, it really was
yeah,
powerful that I could, and he gave me eyes and a heart to see the heart and the eyes of the people that they were hurting just as much as I was hurting. I was hurting in a way, but I knew what I needed. They
yeah,
were hurting in a way that they wanted to take the pain away and they couldn't do it. So they would try to come up with the easiest ways to do it. Right. I was also a different person. I
wow,
had already taken care of my mom died, and I took care of my father, and I handled the lawsuit from my mother's car accident. So I had already in some ways walked through this season already, where my other friends hadn't. Their parents, some of my friends are still just losing their parents now, and I lost my parents in the 80s, you know. So um God blessed me with an amazing grace to understand and not get into it. Fast forward, as we had shared in the beginning of this, that I still had a lot of residue to clean up. I didn't realize how much of some of that did hurt. And I've had to go through some of that purging of my heart
yeah,
also. But at the time that I was going through it, God gave me an immense grace and love and understanding. Um, I was very thankful that I never got into an argument, never got into a shouting match. I understood where my in laws were at. I respect that. I honored that, but I couldn't do what they asked. And, actions speak louder than words. So I can understand where they felt that I
yeah,
wasn't listening. But in the end, it's my three children that I'm going to be spending the rest of my life with. They're the ones that are going to be there. They're the ones, as I put it to them, they're going to be picking out my nursing home, you know? So, um, but
yeah,
God never told me to. If anything, you were talking about walking through this, how decisions that God always brought everything to me. God brought physical therapists to me. Didn't even know people were physical therapists. God brought stem cells to me. A doctor brought his doctor to me to bring stem cells to me, to take Mike to Mexico for stem cells. Everything came to me. And at the time, too, Randy, it was all progressive medicine. People hadn't heard of any of this. It was all new. I mean, it's out there now, but at the
yeah,
time, it was all new. And the nursing home used to, well, where did you hear about this? And where did you get that? And where'd you find this? And where'd you find that? And how about this? And how'd you hear about this? And he literally brought a doctor into the hometown of Mayapack who had hyperbaric, which was one thing, because if I wanted to take Mike for hyperbaric, I would have had to have taken him to a hospital, and they charged like $1,500. Here, alternative hyperbaric was 200, and the insurance covered it. I mean, like, it was literally my backyard. She had everything I needed, you know. So again, God had everything ordained and stepped out along the way. Um, and he did. He just gave me lots of grace. And yes, at the time I became a chaplain. And part of the reason I became a chaplain at the hospital was I wanted to walk by the sides with people the way I the way some of my friends were willing to walk with me. And that was, they never told me what to do. They just walked by my side while I groveled and processed this and just walked this out. Because most people just want to get straight to the answer. Well, unfortunately, you know what? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm going to have a baby, but I have to wait 9 months in order for it to come, you know? It's the same thing in situations like this. And I feel like in many ways, like Joseph, Joseph, God gave him a promise, he gave him a vision, he gave him this, but look what he had to go through. But what he went through when it came to the end, he met his brothers and
Right.
stuff. He said, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Only God can do that kind of work in heart. Only God can bring you through that process and show you those things. And the same with Ruth.
I, wh- there's two things I want to catch on there for people because we all go through stuff. The first, you said a moment ago, God, and we saw that in our journey. God brings you what you need. We overthink it, we overstress it, and it's just keep focused on God. And even though you may not see the answer, you may not see the end result yet, along the way, you will look back and recognize how God brought you what you needed that you couldn't have orchestrated yourself. And God is always faithful to do that. But the other one is, and I would agree with this, and I want to really kind of focus on this for a second. Like you said, Joseph telling his brothers, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Sometimes you're in the middle of it and you can't see how God will ever be able to turn this to the good. It just seems unrealistic. And I can say, and I know you can too, there comes a moment, you don't forget the hurt, you don't forget the pain, but you're
Exactly.
not living it anymore. And you see what God has for you now. And not that you ever want to go
No,
through
that's
that
for sure.
again, but you can rejoice. Yeah, I mean, because when you're in the middle of it, you think you're never going to rejoice again. You think you're never going to laugh again. And there you get to the other side, and God, in His magnificence, does something in your heart that again, you don't want to go back through that journey again. But there is that time of rejoicing. And it's a continual thing. And God is, because the other side is talking about being a pioneer, because you're now on the other side of the mountain, you're moving into, you're discovering, still in the process of discovering more of what God has for you going forward, which is exciting. I'm excited for you as a longtime friend. By the way, Jane is a
I am.
recycled teenager. She's moving it. She's moving into a whole new calling at a later stage of life. But part of the process to do so is God also in the process has recently, and I know in the last few months we've talked about this, how God has healed so many wounds from that season to empower you to be successful in this new season, to move forward and have a greater impact. And you can't take those hurts with you. What would you say to that?
You're right. I can't take the hurts with me, but I can bring the encouragement from the lessons I learned and from the love that Jesus poured on me. And I think part of a big part of that healing came in, as you know, I've been going to school, Bible school, and these two people that came up to speak and share with us their stories, they they um they had orphanages in China, where the children that they took in were children similar to Mike, where they had feeding tubes and they had trachs, and they still loved upon them and nurtured them and took care of them until either they were healed, a few were healed, or God called them home. But the value of those people in them. And I think
Yeah.
that's what happens is, and I suddenly realized I wasn't alone. There was just something about it that just touched my heart, that I saw that I had, that again, that privilege of being snatched from the regular world and transplanted into the world of the disabled. And I think that has a lot to do with it. I think that has a lot to do with, we need to expand our vision. There's so much more out there in the world. I remember Phil Yancey in one of his book, Where Are You, God? There was a chapter in there where medical personnel were all taking care of, again, disabled, silent people. And the biggest thing they learned in that was the value of life. There's ways of communicating with the silent that you don't realize. There's ways that I knew. I think that was one of the things that the nursing home and the nurses said to me, that they were intimidated by me because I knew what was wrong with Mike before they knew what was wrong with Mike. But that's because,
Yeah.
and I said, yeah, I have one patient, you have
Yeah.
35. But that was just me. I could
Yeah.
tell by looking in Mike's eyes. I could tell by looking at some of the things. I could tell some, and there's just ways that you just know. It's beautiful, because isn't that sometimes how God talks to us, when we don't know how to talk to him, when we don't know what to say, yet he understands and we can't put it into words. We can't do that. That beauty of that whole other world. And I think if we could just step outside of our own world and the way it should look, because in every sense of the word, Randy, Mike was a miracle. Was he a miracle the way the world wants to see it?
Yeah.
No, but he was, and his life was an amazing miracle. It was an amazing miracle. So, those are some of the things that I saw and that I learned, just the value, the preciousness, and that's one of the things that I shared with people. Some of your final there's a lot of beautiful, precious living in nursing homes, where people think that's more just the end of life. No, there's a lot. There's a lot of laughter. There's a lot of joy. There's some of the, really, some of your most precious, precious moments are in those days, or in those final. Um,
Yeah. You know, and what want to kind of focus on for a moment, because really, when I ask you to do this, Jane, and we're going to do a follow up down the road, but my purpose was to bring some encouragement to people who are going through their own unique challenges. And the beauty of this format is this is something we can refer people to for years to come. And what I do want to say about my friend Jane is, as I kind of did in the introduction, she is absolutely genuine and she's authentic. And by authentic, what I mean is not just does she mean what she says, but she's experienced it. It's not just an idea, it's not a theory. She's had to rely on God. Now, the beauty is, God is moving her into, and one of the things I really desire for people to recognize, God has a call on each. When you say yes to Jesus, you have a call on your life. You have a divine purpose to impact the world around you. And so often we try to do it in our strength and our strategies. But part of it today is just kind of sharing, you're not done. And God is starting to position Jane after this long experience. And where it would be easy to kind of look at it, hey, I'm in the second half of life, God, how many years have been wasted? However you want to look at it, Jane truly is a recycled teenager. That so much of her ministry today literally is to young people, which is kind of crazy in a positive way. That I'm going to share this. So I didn't get permission, so I hope you had it. Literally,
that's
one
me.
of her kids'
Yes.
friends is getting married and has asked her to be one of the groomsmen because she's had such an impact on his life. And and you're not trying to kind of hang out with young people. It's not like you're
True.
trying to bring back your teenage years or 20s or whatever. God is orchestrating this, and it's genuine. That so part of it is whatever you're going through, God's not done, and He's going to pull something out of it that you're going to, like Joseph. Joseph not only said to his brothers, "What you meant for evil, God meant for good." Joseph saw the benefit God intended for them because he
Right.
says, God sent me ahead to make a place for you so you would become a mighty nation. So when you're going through it, whatever it is, no matter how big it is, no matter how overwhelming it is, as you stay focused on God, which we'll come back to in a moment, God will not only carry you through it, God will not only provide for you in the process in ways you can't strategize. You got to just let it go. You just have to trust. There is no checklist other than that. But He'll also make something out of it, which doesn't mean you don't, have again some sadness about certain aspects. You don't forget the past, but you forget the pain in a way. And God makes something new and produces this new life out of it. And so whatever you're going through, God will produce this new life out of it. But the primary thing is where your focus is. You made a comment that you could never, I'm putting in my words, you could never give up on Jesus. And it reminded me, I had a friend at one of our very, very dark days, one of my really close friends, Chuck, and he said, "Are you going to give up on Jesus?" Literally, it's what he said. And it's like, and all I could say is, where else am I going to go? Literally, I know He's real. I don't see where the light at the end of the tunnel is. This is overwhelming, but where else am I going to go? But I know, Jane, one thing you would say is keep your
It's
focus
like seeing the
on
forest through the
Jesus, no
trees.
matter how
Jesus is
painful,
there
how
through all the
overwhelming,
chaos,
how
through all the fighting,
confusing.
through all the things, through all
Keep
the
your eyes
worries, through
on
all the things that's coming your
Jesus.
way. He's there. He's still there. He's still, and I can guarantee He's probably trying to push everything out of the way so that you can hear Him and that you can see Him. And that is totally it. I mean, I think there's the two. I mean, there's so many moments. Early part of the accident, several things were very pivotal to me. As I shared the blanket, another one sent me a CD named Faithful Heart by Alicia. And one of her songs in there is that, when I ask God where I'm going, He'll only tell me one step at a time. And then there's a chorus in there that goes on to say, if He had told me where I was going, I would have ran ahead and I would have missed out on so much my way. That song in my heart. Then it was Christmas time, and I was reading in Luke, and I was reading about Mary and how the angel Gabriel went to Mary and said to Mary, "You are blessed and highly favored. You are women amongst women." And the Lord said to me, "Stop. Look at Mary's life." Because part of it, I was told that the reason that Mike had his accident was because of sin in my life, which I knew wasn't true. And that's when He said, "Stop and look at Mary." She was a teenage girl. She was engaged to somebody else. Here she was going to have a baby. And she had the baby. And yet, in the end, what happened? She had to watch her son,
Oh, yeah.
be crucified, most brutal of deaths. And yet, she was blessed and highly favored. She was women amongst women. Is that not what we go through difficult times in life? That doesn't mean that we're sinners. It doesn't mean that just because we're upon hard times, it doesn't mean any of that. What it means is that God has so much faith and so much trust in us that He knows that He can use us for His purposes to bring Him glory. And in the end, we'll get the victory. And that's one of the things that was it. And then another was the time that I remember asking the Lord, couldn't you have stopped the guy from putting this fountain in wrong? And that's when I saw this vision of Christ sobbing. So He was crying so hard. He was a mess. He looked worse than I did. That I hurt because he was so upset. He hurts. He cries as much as we cry. He hurts as much as he hurts just like we as parents hurt when we see our kids going through difficult and hard times. And I knew that he was right there with me. I knew he was in the pit with me. And a lot of strength, a lot of grace. That was my encouragement. I wish I was stronger and braver, but
You, but you know what? It's when you mentioned that earlier, because it really challenged me. You know, Martha and Mary, when Lazarus died, and Jesus wept. We forget that. We so easily overlook that. And there are times, I mean, I'll be brutally honest. There were times, you know, Jane, we were falsely accused. I mean, it was so brutal. And some of the hardest stuff was how Christians treated us. That like you said, must be sin in your life. You must have done something, whatever. And it's easy to fall into that trap like,
sometimes, yeah.
God, how can you allow this?
Yeah,
And if we're
exactly.
not careful, we so easily get that mental
Yes.
picture of God sitting there on the throne. Now, half of this is correct, but we can get this mental picture like God going, come on, tough it out. Now, part of it is he is saying tough it out, but he's saying tough it out with tears in his eyes. He's got tears in his eyes while he's saying it. And God does see the beginning from the end. And sorry, I'm tearing up now. When you're going through it, as much as you can, keep your focus on Jesus. As painful as it is, don't ask why. And surround yourself with, you know, when Moses went to the top of the mountain, when they're attacked by the Amalekites, and he kept his staff up, as long as the staff was up,
Right.
they were victorious. And when he was too tired to do so, Aaron and Hur held his arms up. Make sure you surround yourself with people. I'm not saying you don't ostracize everybody who can't, that just doesn't have, some people don't have the ability to hold your arms up. But surround yourself with those who do. They don't have to understand. Aaron and Hur didn't ask why he had to hold the staff up. They just recognized he needed that. And I want to honor you, Jane, that you were one of those friends that when we went through a season that seemed never ending, when I had no more strength, you were one of those friends that just held my arms up. And like I said, I'll never forget the day you said, God knows you can handle it. And if that had come from somebody else that they read it in a book, it wouldn't have the power. But because we have been friends so long, I knew you understood the reality of it. It wasn't a cliche. You were speaking from an understanding of real truth. And so, as we kind of wrap it up here, besides keeping their eyes on Jesus, what final thoughts would you share with our audience? Recognizing, I think for me,
First,
the context is
it was hard for me at
God
times
knows you
to
can
watch you
handle it.
walk through
Keep
this
your eyes on
because I
Jesus,
couldn't give you an
but
answer
also
because
He's
there's no
going to bring
answer. It's the
life
process,
out of it. And what
unfortunately.
would
And
you say to wrap
that's
things up?
hard. And I'd say just through that, for people who are walking by the side of people going through different, is to continually be the encouragement to them. You know, let them let it out. Some, you got to let it out sometimes. Sometimes you just have to let it out. You have to let them, just let them let
Yeah,
it out. Don't hold on to it. Don't, just be that bouncing board. But the other for me, which was really, really imperative, as much as I know that there was the negative talk and people were looking, I all I could do was be thankful and grateful. Um,
yeah,
and just have a heart of gratitude, just being so grateful of, because I could see God's hands in it. And it was sad to me at times that I couldn't share because the people didn't understand how God's hand was in this, how God was really leading me and guiding me through this. Um, Although I do think there was a time when I showed up at church with Mike and told him that I had just brought him back from Mexico to get stem cells. They're like, "You did what?" I was like, yeah, I took him on JetBlue. My son and I, we took him on JetBlue, so I had the van for the
Right.
weekend, so I brought him to church. That was funny. You did what? Yeah, yeah, it was really cool, but it was still a testimony. But I think, is to be thankful for all my wonderful cheerleaders who were by my side. You know that they're friends that, you do life together. You go through the real hard school of hard knocks, and you encourage each other through. And I think that's just it. As time went on, and as I shared in the earlier, I was young. I was young. I was the first. Nobody had been through it before. I was paving roads that nobody had gone down before until they all started going through it. One of the things I remember I was saying, it's different. A person turning around saying how she had lost a grandmother. She knows what it's like to lose someone. I said, it's really different losing a parent. And it wasn't until she lost, she goes, it really is different losing a parent, isn't it? And just being gracious as much as you can, but really keeping your eyes on the Lord, knowing that He chose you. And did I share that with you, Randy, when I said that God knows you can handle it? Because in Job, the first and second chapter of Job, God even said, how about my servant Job? But also put limitations on Satan as to what he could and couldn't do to Job. That's how you know that you're in the palm of God's hand. You may
Yeah.
not like it, may not be great, but we join in the suffering of Jesus, and then the other was how in I think it's in Luke, yeah, Luke 22, where Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane and he's pouring his heart out before God. And he
Right.
goes, Lord, let this cup pass from me. And what happened instead is the Lord sent him an angel to strengthen him and encourage him. And he just prayed harder. So,
Yeah.
our answers come. They may not always be the way we want, but it's life. We're the encouragement. We're out in worlds. I was out in a world where most people wouldn't want to be in, bringing the life of Jesus as best I
Yeah.
could to touch their hearts. So keep your eyes on the Lord. Nothing is wasted. It's not always fun. And
Well, you just said something powerful there, and I want people to grab that because I didn't bring up Job, but yeah, I remember when you told me that God knows you can handle it. We look at the story of Job, and we have this crazy expectation that God is going to tell us why He allowed that, and it actually really never does. In fact, at the end, when Job finally blows his top, God shows up and He says, "Who questions my wisdom in ignorance?" Which sounds a little harsh, but if you think about it, God's wisdom is infinite. Our ability to understand is that big. But what He did do is He knew Joseph had the ability, the perseverance, the trust to make it. Didn't mean he didn't have his, I like that, his Oreo moments. Mine were double stuffed Oreos. When you eat a whole bag. It's like, we have our Oreo moments when we know it's not the right answer, but we're coping. But God set the limits. He wouldn't let anything was too much for Job. And I know for myself and I know for you, there were moments it felt like it was too much. But God is faithful. And even the New Testament talks about how in the end, God is always a rewarder. And so it's keeping your eyes
amen.
on Jesus. And for those who have friends, even though you don't understand, and even though sometimes the season is long, just holding their arms up. And I'm thinking of one friend over in the UK, and what they've said is over and over, we don't understand, but we believe in you. And sometimes, there's nothing more, but at least that is something. But ultimately, and from my heart, what I want to share with people, what I'd like to leave people with is, once you get through the process, once you're through that journey, God is going to make
Amen.
something amazing out of it. God's not done with you yet.
No,
Don't try
thank
to
you, Randy.
figure out, don't try to picture what it's going to be. What God does will always be so much better than what you envision. And maybe, like Jane, you'll wind up being a recycled teenager. Jane, thank you so much for doing this. We've talked about it for a while.
Thank you for being my
And I
support.
do want us to do a
I'm
follow
telling you,
up
Randy, you
a
made a
little
huge
further down the
difference.
road when
You
you're a
made a
little
huge difference.
further into the journey of recognizing what that new
I
season
love
of
you.
life is, so that we can share that with people and the
Yes, we will.
lessons that have been learned. But thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing the transparency.
And the same with you,
Hey,
because you know he's not
you know what?
done. We're on that road.
You know what? I
God
love you.
bless you all.
We're going to spend
You got
eternity
it.
in heaven together. You're one of my dearest friends, and I truly am excited to see the successes and the victories God has coming up for you in the future. Amen. Jane, thanks again, and we'll get back together soon.